Hello and welcome to the Transfer Flow podcast. And on today's episode, we look back at all the best action from the weekend, starting with the North London derby, where we ask, is there a blueprint for beating Spurs? Then we head over to Anfield, where Liverpool lost to Forest. Arne Slot's attack is the one that's not working, but maybe he's fixed the defence. Then Southampton 0-3 against Manchester United. Could Russell Martin's head be the first on the chopping block? And then on to Newcastle, where there's mean girls gossip galore. Eddie Howe versus Paul Mitchell. Who will come out on top? Stay tuned. Hello and welcome back to the Transfer Flow podcast. It's me, Patrick Van Straten. I'm back from holiday and I'm joined by Ted Knutson.
It's me. I'm not on holiday. And welcome back, by the way.
Thank
you tanned? Are you sunburnt? How's that working?
I'm like as tanned as I get. I stay out of the sun. I fear it. It doesn't, we don't work together, I feel. But you were pre-holidayed.
I was, yeah, I came in fresh, daisy fresh, as it were. I saw you on, I believe, a bed under a cabana saying very nice things about people that were plugging your wife's book.
Yeah, I'm now on like a full tilt, I guess promotion tour for my wife's book, which honestly, I'm just like desperate to leverage like my weird, very, very tiny slice of football fame into more sales for my wife's book. That's the main thing. So yeah, feel free to buy it. It's excellent.
There you go. What's the title of it?
In the UK, it's called This Immaculate Body. In the US, it's called Creep, a love story. It's by my wife, Emma Van Straten. Try and spell my name correctly. Otherwise, you'll end up with like South African rugby players. But I don't know. I guess we should probably plug the actual business that we're
look, see, this is part of the quid pro quo. You come on here and you lead things, and then we're like, what would you like to plug today? Eventually, it'll be, Manscaped, and you'll have your own version of that. Absolutely. So, hey, welcome. This is the Transfer Flow podcast. My name is Ted Knutson. I am the founder of this ridiculous thing, but joined by a cast of merry crew, as it were. And if you're interested in us, we have a newsletter, thetransferflow.com/subscribe. It's a daily newsletter where we do, usually during the off season, it is transfer analysis. But now that we're in the season, we're going to be breaking down the Premier League. We're going to talk about some Champions League. I think Kim's got a Champions League preview coming out tomorrow on the newsletter. We obviously have our pod. It's either on YouTube, where we love feedback and comments, or on your various podcasting host platforms where a 5-star review, like and subscribe, as the small children say. That's what we're going for. But today, most importantly, what are we going to do?
Well, we're going to do a little recap of the weekend's action. And look, we always have to talk about Arsenal up front.
We don't actually, but we're going to, because it's insufferable North London derby sort of afterglow.
Sure, but also I feel like, everybody needs to decide up top whether we are hopelessly biased in favour of Arsenal or whether we hate Arsenal and will never give them a fair shake. So it's always good to do them straight off the bat. Apparently there's no middle ground on Arsenal. You can't cover them in any sort of objective way. But the objective fact is that they beat Spurs 1-0 yesterday.
They did.
Now, obviously going into this game, injuries to Arsenal's midfield, and the absence of Declan Rice through suspension, had moved the line on this match. So you in your betting preview felt there was some value in Spurs, but as it approached the game, it felt like it moved still further towards Spurs. In the end, Arsenal managed to get the job done, but it was a very, very even game. I mean, there was kind of nothing in it.
Yeah, so I think like 72% of the time, Spurs would come out, if you looked at the expected goals, with either a point or 3 points in that type of game. Clearly, and I say this without bias because I am an expert in this area, but also an Arsenal fan, like there was a big foul on the set piece goal, a big two-handed push in order to create space and separation for Gabriel, who's very good at the headers, but it helps when he's got like a meter of space because he pushed the dude in front of him away. It was a really interesting game, and I think that part of the Arsenal Twitter commentary is that we beat you with two uncles in the midfield. And I'm like, yeah, it's not a midfield you want to run out there regularly, but they managed to do it.
Well, I mean, in the end, it was kind of a battle of total non-midfields, because obviously Spurs ran out of midfield of Kulusevski, Maddison and Bentancur. So it wasn't exactly a game that was decided by sheer quality in the centre of the park, I would say.
No, it felt like a bit of a track meet. Like when you watched it on television, it was as if there was a tennis match and you just kind of had to like fast forward across the net on each side because like the ball was very transitional. Arsenal are probably going to play this type of style while their midfielders are injured. So especially given Odegaard is sort of the thing that helps them tick. And I don't think that that's necessarily going to be a fun or sexy thing to do, but it's necessary for them to be able to just really strangle a game and then hope they get the results on the other side. The tough part is if you're not scoring a lot of goals, then it's tough to chase City because they're going to be scoring three on a regular basis at home anyway, and getting 3 points almost every weekend.
Yeah, I mean, it felt with this game like it was... Well, there's something we're going to come on to with maybe a vulnerability of Spurs as well, which Arteta might have seen and thought he could work with, especially with Martinelli in the lineup. But it did seem like the plan was, let's stop anything interesting happening in this game and put ourselves within a shit happens of 3 points. And that's exactly what they did. I mean, coming out of the game, I kind of thought, well, I guess this is a good sign for Arsenal's defence, that they can do this without Declan Rice. It gives me some confidence that this is more like the team of last year.
But it took two midfielders to do it without Rice as opposed to one.
Yeah, but I'd say between those two midfielders, they have the same number of healthy knees as Declan Rice does. So, it all evens out. But I think it was pointed out by James Benge on Twitter that after the Arsenal goal, Spurs had 6 shots for a combined 0.17 XG.
Yeah.
Scott Willis said that they completed 1 of 13 crosses, and it did feel... It actually... It felt extremely Premier League from 15 years ago at the end. Swinging crosses in, they get headed away. Let's try again.
David Moyes at Manchester United with the what was it, 82 crosses or something absurd against Fulham one time. Ravi said actually in the Slack, we were watching the game, and he's like, it feels like Spurs could just do these for another 3 hours and they still wouldn't have any results off of the crosses. So, and that's actually a thing that happens at the end of matches that teams seem to switch into, partly because it's what's allowed. When you watch a game, it's really interesting because of how things have changed. And there's this argument going around about whether stats and data have really changed anything on the pitch. Michael Cox had a thing last week. Like, I feel pretty dramatically that they have, but like part of that is because like I know how it's changed for us and how it's changed for some of our friends. They don't necessarily talk about it. But one of the things that they do talk about that teams still fall back into is when you have the value of the ball in the final third, and particularly in and around the penalty box, like it's in and around the penalty box is like 5% above. That's really good. The cross out on the wide side is like 3, sometimes 2.5%, because like it's really difficult to connect to it. And so actually when you have a crossing strategy and not a sort of pullback strategy, which is more commonly what it is, especially if you have like a right-footed cross from the right-hand side, it's extremely difficult to get somebody on the end of those and create goals. You have to do it a lot. It's a high volume. And especially against a sort of evenly matched team, unless you got some sort of specific advantage where somebody can regularly be able to tee up great crosses and you get a header on the end of it. And you may or may not have somebody that can do that in the modern game. Plenty of teams don't sign strikers that can head the ball particularly well. They might be able to, but so it's this whole equation of like, how do we create better chances? And when you end up sort of trailing the game, a lot of what's available to you is that type of crossing. And it happens over and over again. And I just used to put my head into the desk over and over. When my teams did it, or when you're gambling and you're like, yep, there's like so little chance that we're coming back from this because of these reasons. Sometimes you get corners out of it that are a little more valuable. And I think Spurs are showing signs of life in their corners. But I did like the design, even though I thought it was mistimed, of Arsenal's corner. The Spurs defensive structure, basically a lot of stuff needing near post. And Arsenal decided to go far post in to basically create 2 problems. One, they were going to create a mismatch somewhere in there with numbers because Spurs have like a pretty dotted zone. And the other bit is when you bring runners from the far side into the near, the defenders have to watch where the ball's coming from in the corner. And you can't split your attention so that you can really watch where your man is or your potential marker is and the ball at the same time. You have to make that choice. The whole thing about set piece design is forcing teams to make these choices over and over again on the fly in a very fast-paced situation. It's basically an impossible job when you do it right, but you have to get the delivery right as well. Anyway, that's how Arsenal sort of scored that corner. It's something Spurs have gotten better at, but still are not great there. But I think the thing you wanted to talk about was Spurs have a big problem right now that I don't think got addressed in the summertime, and it's still coming back to bite them over and over.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like transition for Spurs has been a huge problem, and so we got a question this week. I don't actually have the question here, but maybe we can have them up on screen or something.
Can you break down why Spurs were so leaky last year? The defensive numbers were quite high in a number of key positions, and so I'd be interested to see which metrics would give away or give insight to their weak defensive performance. Now, Kim felt, and Kim's a Spurs fan, that Spurs like really missed out on a midfielder this summer,
Sure.
and so that type of midfielder that so many other teams were also looking for, somebody that can really destroy play, something that United went out and paid 60 million euros for Manuel Ugarte, who's good at kicking people and destroying play. He doesn't seem necessarily to do a lot of other things, but he doesn't make many mistakes. Spurs seem to be lacking that type of player, and you're seeing it in their matches. And so when teams are allowed to run up against your center backs over and over again, that can potentially cause problems from a defensive perspective. I think they addressed some of the issues in attack, but they haven't stabilized that midfield. And if you don't have a stable midfield, like, you will just see a leaky set of defensive numbers.
Yeah, I mean, last season, to talk about the numbers that the question is bringing, last season we saw Udogi, we saw Porro, and we saw Romero, all considerably above average for their position for number of defensive actions per game. Even Van de Ven was, I think, just above average, but he's a considerably more reserved defender than the other three guys there. And I guess to a lot of people, they think, okay, these guys are winning the ball a lot, but obviously it's more opportunities for them to make mistakes.
You would like them not to have that opportunity. That's
Exactly.
a big problem. So for those of you who are stats nerds and have been following along for a while, you'll know that I hate the errors stat, and it's an old Opta stat. And somebody was like crediting whether or not they made an error, or debiting, if you wanted to, whether or not someone made an error that led to a shot. But the reality is this is a defensive structure issue more so than an error issue. So if I have to defend as a center back 1v1 with players all the time, and part of my job is pressing and destroying something and stepping up and winning the ball, like, I'm much more likely to make an error that leads to a shot. If I'm a defensive midfielder, I'm slightly less likely. If I'm part of a pack of four, which is two center backs and two defensive midfielders, or I've got a fullback out there and another defensive midfielder, and I'm a center back, that is much less likely. It's a much more resilient defensive structure to not allow errors. And so this is much more of a defensive stat and telling you how often players are expected to make these great challenges. And if you're Virgil van Dijk, maybe you can go 1v1, or at least you used to be able to go 1v1 with every player in the world and never make a mistake and never end up getting beat off of the dribble. But for most players, the skill level is so high and the play is so fast in the Premier League or even La Liga that, like, that's an extremely difficult thing. And it's much less a player stat than it is a defensive structure stat, and how often somebody else might have made a mistake to put you in that position in the first place.
Is there an element as well where Spurs need to be thinking about this when they're looking to change over their attacking personnel going forward? Like, obviously they've added Solanke, but they seem to be committing to more time with Son in there. It feels like more of these attacks need to be cut off at source, right, through effective pressing. Because last season they rated as a pretty aggressive pressing side, and yet defensively they were pretty porous.
So the other thing that people won't realize if they sort of haven't been behind the scenes in a lot of coaching area is that there's old style pressing, there's like middle style pressing, there's new style pressing, right? And a lot of old style pressing is, oh yeah, if the ball's in your zone, go close down the ball.
Sure.
But the reality is that just allows them to press it somewhere else. And sometimes the space that you vacated is more valuable than the one that you you move into. And so that's actually a useful thing for the attacking team and not a negative. The middle style pressing is, okay, we have one person pressing, and then we kind of have some second layer of structure that is useful. We can force them to sort of kick it around the back, but we're not necessarily going to destroy it and win the ball up high. Middle blocks are more of a structured thing where they choose where they want to press, and they also choose where they're keeping congested. And then you get the high press. And the high press in the German style is twofold. One, obviously, anytime the ball goes in your zone, you are sprinting to close it down. But there's a second element of it that actually you're sprinting to close it down to close off one or two of the passing options that the person might have. So wherever your direction is, you have to close down one or two of those. And then the third element of that is the players that are most likely to be the passing options from the attacker. Their defenders also need to step so that they can intercept or destroy that pass. And that is the structured way to be able to pull off a high press. If you're doing aggressive things, fine, but you have to do it as a team level and not at a player level. You might remember Alexis Sanchez. This dude was the most willing presser of the ball of any attacker I have ever seen. He loved to go chasing after somebody that had the ball. The problem was Arsenal at that period had decided to start playing sort of a deep block with Steve Bold as coaching the defense. And so he'd go press it by himself and then he'd go over there. And he'd do it over and over again, and no one ever helped him. And it did not help the Arsenal press at all. It didn't help them win the ball back. It just meant that Alexis was making runs to go down the ball. Spurs right now are missing that second or third tier of sort of conscious, coordinated press. And I think that along with some deficits in the midfield, are causing them to, yes, put up some pretty good numbers defensively in terms of, are they pressing? But not put up the best numbers in terms of, are we limiting opposition shots or making sure that the ones they get are bad?
And so I think it's a really interesting thing to watch with Spurs going forward. I mean, in this game, you could kind of see that Arsenal's hope was, well, look, we've got two old men in midfield, but two old men who can hit a pass. Maybe one of these old men can hit a pass to Martinelli running in behind, and they had that chance early on, and you thought this is exactly the plan that Arsenal must have had. This is going to have to be something that the Postecoglou solves, but is this a problem that you think can be solved entirely through coaching, or is this just going to have to wait till January, wait till next year to be truly upgraded?
Yeah, they lack some personnel. One of the things that you also have from choosing a defense is like you do have weaknesses. Like everybody has defensive weaknesses, and there are certain ways that teams can find out that are going to be sort of a blueprint as to how to beat you with this personnel grouping on a regular basis. Arsenal used to have this as well. So Arsenal used to not have legs in the midfield, or they used to not have great fullbacks that could cover space. They used to only be able to beat somebody on one side. With Martinelli like having legs and a willingness to run it behind him when he's healthy, like, and having Saka, who's like a get out of jail free card for Arsenal's attack most of the time. Now you got both sides. And if you stretch both sides, that means you can't congest the middle. If you can't congest the middle, then the opposition midfielders get the opportunity to do stuff, whatever that stuff might be. For Spurs right now, like that transitional blueprint is pretty strong. And it means that their defenders are going to be stretched a lot. If their defenders are pushing up, trying to create chances in attack, then that means that there's more space for other teams to be able to attack behind. Spurs aren't the only team that are having this problem right now. I think Glasner's Crystal Palace are particularly stretched. Like, they don't have a great midfielder. Will Hughes looks like he doesn't have the legs, pace, or wherewithal to be able to defend in that style well enough. And so they're giving up a bunch of shots too. But it's something to keep an eye on. As we've talked about how the league has changed. We're seeing more teams want to press, but that doesn't mean that you just successfully press. It doesn't mean that you just tell them go press and then magically you don't give up more shots. Like it's a risk reward problem that teams are definitely running into, the risk problem as much as they are the reward.
Yeah. Well, I think it was an interesting one to keep an eye on going forward. Obviously, a difficult emotional time for you to see the team you support win with a set piece goal against a team who you were hoping would get at least a draw for the sake of your bet. But
I launched the variance betting thing knowing that like emotionally it was going to be hard for me. Partly because like I have to take this on board and I actually care about my bets again, and partly because it's going to put me in situations every single week where I might be betting against Arsenal, or I might have to bet for Manchester United, both of which are like challenging in my But we do what we have to. And honestly, like we got like almost 200 subs over the first weekend. Most of the analysis seemed to be pretty good, at least from my perspective, even if the bets didn't work out. And usually that's like a good long-term sign that things are going to swing positive. So I'm pretty stoked about it. It's nice to be back doing it. And people seem to be really excited, much more so than I was expecting. So that's nice to hear.
Yeah, I turned it on because I thought I'll watch a few minutes of this and see what it's about. And I ended up watching the whole thing. Even though I wasn't on it, Ted. But anyway, the main thing to take from the Arsenal game is not a foul by Gabriel. Should be allowed to push people. It's totally fine. Hadorkan, whoever you want. Shall we move on to the biggest shock of the weekend?
Yeah, so I think there were two trap games this weekend from a betting perspective. There might
Hmm.
have actually been three, but this one was one that I was like, ooh, I don't want any part of that. So coming off an international break,
Hmm.
when you have teams, so there are more lower tier teams that have international players in the Premier League now. So like it's not like a basic rule of law anymore. But it used to be coming off an international break, you really are not stoked about high handicaps. If so, a handicap would be it's not just Liverpool to win, but it's Liverpool to win by 2 goals or more,
Hmm.
right? And so that's one way that you kind of make 50-50 bets, which are more interesting in the Asian handicap market and also in the United States market than simply, is this team going to win? Are they going to lose? Are they going to draw? Like oftentimes when you get up near like, two, like a handicap of 2, that means that the underdog is somewhere between like, 15 and 20 to 1 to win outright,
Hmm.
which tells you how unlikely Forest going in would have potentially been in order to win this game pre-match.
Hmm. And it was, I mean, so you thought there was some value in Forest on the road, and to say the least.
So I think when I was looking at their transfer stuff, like I was kind of surprised by the quality of the players there.
Sure.
And then we saw the early season, the first 3 matches, and 3 matches is a very small sample. So like it's a little bit of signal, but you're trying to adjust for all these sorts of things in your head that the models aren't aware of. So who did they play? Did they just play promoted teams? Well, that's pretty weak. Or did they just play like City, Arsenal and Liverpool? Well, that's like an absolute beating for anybody going in there. So like, you're trying to adjust that while the model's like, it doesn't know what a promoted team should do. They kind of know the averages of those teams in the past. But the one that like, Forest, I was looking at their numbers. I was like, these are better than I thought. And they really were very good at Southampton. And was it a Brentford game that they were pretty tough on as well? So I looked at them and was like, I think that they might be a tricky match. And also they have Nuno as their coach, right? So we know his teams historically are very difficult to break down and beat. Like especially when he comes in and has a preseason with them, and they've got decent runners and decent talent. So I'm looking at that saying, all right, Liverpool actually had players in international duty. It is fatiguing. They haven't had like a pre-match to like, sort of sort this out through training through the whole week. Like, I don't like the idea that they basically have to score 3 goals in order to cover this handicap. So that's where I thought the value was. It turns out there was more value in Forest than I was expecting.
I think there was more value than Nuno even would have expected. But it was an interesting game because Liverpool's defense, which we've, I think, all been kind of impressed by early season, was still impressive in this game. About 0.4 XG conceded from the numbers I saw somewhere around there.
No shots until after the 50th minute, maybe 55th. And there were only 5 shots in the whole game for them. So one of the early stories of Liverpool is that unlike last year, and actually the last couple of years, where Klopp and his teams seem to be like much more entertainment focused than necessarily shutting up shop and never allowing shots focus versus his early era. This year, they hadn't given up. They were averaging 8 shots a game against, or slightly less. This time, only 5. So Liverpool's defense under Arne Slot looks excellent. Then, you just figure, oh yeah, they're going to grind out a 1-0 if they need to. It's no big deal. Well, that didn't happen.
Yeah, I was trying to work out though what was going on here, because I mean, Liverpool moved the ball into the final third pretty easily. Got the ball into the area at a kind of okay rate, not great. But then it was kind of, they were baited into bad shots, or they got sucked into bad shots, because ultimately in the end, the numbers, there's quite a bit of variation in this game, but I saw something between 0.9 and 1.2 XG for Liverpool in this game of 14 shots, which is somewhere between 0.06 and under 0.09 XG per shot, which is low.
Yeah, so the StatsBomb numbers have them at 0.87,
Wow.
and Forest at 0.38. And the reason why we use StatsBomb numbers is because it's got a lot more accurate information about which defenders are in front of the ball and where the goalkeeper position is than any other set of data out there. And so we look at it to have like a little bit better signal as to the quality of the shots. 0.87 on 14 shots is pretty miserable, and there were a variety of them. But in some cases, like this defense in particular, is designed to only give up fairly poor shots. And if you've got a decent goalkeeper at the back of that, you live and survive, week after week on this. The best chance of the game that StatsBomb had was Diogo Jota in the 25th minute. And then honestly, like everything in the second half was like a 3% or 5% chance or worse. So like they were just they shut up shop. They were really good, and Liverpool maybe did not have the legs in order to find the way to push through.
Yeah, I was looking at this, and Jota, Diaz, and Salah went 1 for 10 on dribble attempts in this game, which you know, on a different day, you get through a couple of those, maybe something else happens, but it just felt like it wasn't quite. It was a bit sludgy, I thought. But Gravenberch continues to look really nice in that deeper role.
Did you see
Incredible
Camembert? I'm sorry,
Yes,
was that a
that's what I
cheese
said.
reference?
Ryan Camembert in midfield. Another good performance from him, especially on the passing. But he's looking defensively sound, good.
It's it's one of those things where like you don't really know what a kid's played or or could be playing like from his upbringing. Sometimes as a professional, you get slotted into a particular spot, and then you don't know like what they can do unless you give them a chance. If you've got players that naturally fit that slot, then you know just ignore that. But sometimes you don't. And you're like, all right, so we're going to throw you in there because you have some of the physical traits or some of the passing traits that we need. And sometimes like it just takes off that way. There was a period of time back in like 13, 14, where Santi Cazorla was almost an inside left wing. He was basically playing as a 10 because Arsenal didn't really have any width and they didn't have a proper left winger. But Cazorla's numbers looked like he was a defensive midfielder from that spot. Like he was very aggressively being able to close things down at, 4'11" or whatever his actual stature is. And I was like, I think there's a chance that he could turn into like a full regista and be able to play that as his career gets a little longer, because like he doesn't have the legs to beat people anymore. Turned out that was like an awesome position for him. Mikel Arteta was another one where he was a 10 early on.
Yeah.
And then was brought back in there, kind of the Andrea Pirlo type, can hit the passes all over the park, defends well enough, understands the game and reads it well enough to keep things in front of him and blow stuff up. So yeah, I think Gravenberch, as we would say, as opposed to Camembert, is finding his feet in a role that might have been unexpected, but it's very clear that Liverpool's system and the personnel in it right now are executing the defensive side at a very high level. This is a blip. I think Forest are going to take some scalps throughout the course of the season. There's another team that I think actually has sort of shown up as better than maybe expected, and certainly than their table position last year would have expected in Brentford. I think Brentford, if they're able to keep some health, are going to be a problematic matchup for a lot of teams this year as well. So those two, you say, might be kind of the top of the mid-table groups that we would see going on through this year, and unexpectedly so, because they're tiny in recent terms anyway. They're tiny names. You're like, oh yeah, those are sort of championship bounce teams that just are hanging out in the Premier League right now. Yeah, they might be better than a lot of big names this year.
Yeah, I mean, Brentford, for those of us who are Brentford believers, the game against City, ends in 3 points for City, like pretty normal stuff. Haaland scores another couple of goals, very annoying. But I thought it reflected pretty well on Brentford, like once again. I mean, by the expected goal numbers, you look at the shot numbers, and it's 18-8 in favour of City. You look at the expected goal numbers, it's more like 1.6-1, and you think, again, there's always something here. Like Thomas Frank, it is shocking to me that Thomas Frank is still in that job.
Why?
Because I think there was a period where it felt like they were not really adding talent the way that other teams around them were. And I thought the fact that Thomas Frank came up from the Championship playing a certain sort of style that you need to get promoted, and then managed to stabilize in the Premier League having to play a different kind of style, I thought was highly impressive and went a little bit underrated, but I assumed it wouldn't go underrated by the kind of people who take notice of that sort of thing. Plus, he's a great communicator. He's good with young players. There are loads of things to like in it.
Okay, story time. So I love Thomas Frank. I had the opportunity to interview him for like 2 different positions. We recommended him for a bunch of jobs before he got the Brentford job. We saw him when he was at Brøndby, and like, okay, I think this guy's teams have talent. He has some sort of tactical flexibility around him as well, which is interesting. He's able to take young players and be able to develop them, which was really important for us. And he was brought in to kind of stabilize the tactical elements when Dean Smith was there at Brentford. And he did some of that. One of the problems with Dean Smith's group, in the same way that Mark Warburton's group before, was that their midfield were not controlling midfields. And so when you allow teams to run up and have their attackers run against your center backs all the time, like you end up in track meets and you give up more goals and more attack, more shots than you should be. Dean's team don't play good defense. He's over in MLS now, I think, at Charlotte. And so the question about Thomas was, would he be able to stabilize the defensive side of this and be able to push on? Now, he needed quite a good defensive midfielder and able to do that. Christian Norgard was the guy they finally ended up with, a reclamation project, Danish reclamation project from Fiorentina. And then, yes, he's had enough attack to be able to push through in the championship. Finally did not have to try and win a playoff, which was a bit of a boon to everyone's hearts. And then I think one of the reasons he might be overlooked is, as you said, they weren't adding talent. They were sort of like sacrificing talent. They were consolidating some cash flow, and he's been scrapping a little bit over the last 2 years. And teams like, oh, well, maybe he's lost the polish, right? But when you see a Nuno do something like that, then he ends up with a big job. Yeah. But Thomas Frank has been like, yeah, I don't know, maybe. But Thomas Frank doesn't have those sort of other league wins or other league trophies under his belt. And so like maybe there's just a question about that. Or maybe he likes his project at Brentford and he understands the ownership group and he's trusted at this point to be able to run this and have input. So there's a team that's not on our list right now that seems to be a little bit bigger divide between the director of football ownership group and what the head coach has to say. But we'll get to that in a bit.
Yeah, we'll come on to that. Just to finish up on City and Brentford, it was kind of interesting to me that Brentford had so much possession in this game. They had like 47%, and I don't know
at City.
At City, yeah, exactly. And City have evolved away from pressing aggressively, I would say, both
at times,
but even in personnel, right? Like I don't want to press really hard with Haaland and Grealish, to be honest with you. I'm not saying they can't do it. I'm just saying that they're not, guys who I would really think of to go and do that with. Obviously, they came down to, I think they were pretty much middle of the pack last season for PPDA, one of the less aggressive sides. Is this a strategy that you think can work against City to try and hold the ball and make them press more, if that's something they're less comfortable with?
I think that's one of the first times that we might be able to ask those questions. Okay. I think Pep is dealing with a lot of institutional turnover right now. So just today, City's case against them for the 115 charges that the Premier League have brought has started being litigated, and the lawyer bills from both sides of that are exorbitant. Like it might even cover City's transfer budget for next summer. But what you've seen because of that, what we saw this window was they were very quiet, like very, very. And they have a lot of age, I think, in that midfield and the attack. So like Rodri came off of a Euros, right? Where like he went all the way through it. And so that's like step one. You're like, okay, he might be a bit tired. They played a lot last year. You have a Kevin De Bruyne that his body's only going to allow him to play like 60% of the minutes if you're lucky. You've got Bernardo, who's like 29 and was rumored to potentially maybe be going somewhere else because he'd like a new contract. Like there's all of these things in there where like, okay, Pep's teams have to maintain some level of balance in their output, more so than I think they had before when they had a lot more peak age guys. And so I think that he's looking at it. Maybe he's challenging himself. Like, maybe he's got a degree of difficulty. He's been running the table for too long. It's too easy for him. It's like, all right, so can I change up my style in like year 8 or whatever? And can we play a different way? I'm not sure. But I think you're right. I think it's something to be aware of because when they are a little bit older, when they have like these series of games that are going to tire them out and bring fatigue in, or whether they're coming off an international break where, the whole squad's been out and might be a bit tired and coming back. Like those are all good questions to ask of them. I don't think there are more than like half the teams in the Premier League that can ask those questions. And maybe many of, only half of that might think to ask it and press their players to take that tactical setup. But maybe it's a thing in Europe that they're going to also struggle with, or maybe it'll allow them to break through again. I'm not sure, but it's a great thing to keep an eye on and a really good spot because it's unusual for Pep's teams.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks, Ted. I appreciate it. Shall we move on to the God? Well, I guess like the movable object was moved by the stoppable force this weekend at St Mary's. Horrendous. I mean,
did you watch that? Did you get a chance to watch the first half?
I saw at the beginning, and I was just like, United are in the tumble dryer. This is amazing. And then just Saints. I don't think we've not been positive about Southampton. I'm considerably less positive now. I mean, United were a horrible road team last season. They were firmly in the bottom half of the league. But Southampton, as you said, in this game, pretty good start. Get a penalty, miss it, and then for the rest of the match, are we allowed to shoot still? Like, what's going on?
No ideas, no clue what's going on. You'd have to say that it was like a bit of bad luck, especially in the second goal. Like that Rashford goal, like never happens.
Yeah,
it's almost impossible to be able to shoot through traffic, to have the goalkeeper not see it, and then he pinged it off the inside of the far post. I'm part of that's a defensive problem where you shouldn't be letting Rashford have the time to be able to pick out that shot, or the angle to be able to do it. It's a great piece of skill to be able to do that. Presumably, he's practiced that a million times on the training ground. But like, it should never happen. It's a bit of bad luck. The set piece was nice. I thought the set piece was really good. So United set pieces have been fucking dire for like a decade. Like one of the worst teams in the league. Under Jose, you could just reliably count on them to be terrible that way and also terrible on the other side where they couldn't defend a set piece. This one showed like, actual sign of thought and design. They saw that Southampton probably were a bit late in vacating the zone, and they weren't doing it as a good organized group, so that you might be able to have a laggard that would trip the offside line, so that you could be able to. Then they saw the far post overload as well. So basically, the guy that was slow was the far fullback. They did an inverted cross to be able to swing it in to get verticality, and you saw three guys that were over there watching for that cross to come in. So clearly, they knew that they were supposed to do that. I liked it, and obviously that was a big spot in cracking back. But like you can't get rid of the first 35 minutes. Like United fans were just on the ropes the whole time. Like, oh God, we got to watch this again. I can't believe that we're never going to get past this. Tyler Dibling absolutely had Dallo on ice. He couldn't stop him the whole time, and that's where the penalty came from. And that's not the first good fullback or allegedly good fullback that we've seen him do that to. This is an 18-year-old that no one can seem to defend in and around the box, which is going to be something fun to watch for the rest of the year. But then what happened? I can't explain it. Like they just like basically decided to step aside, be like, yeah, okay, you guys take the rest of the game. We're done.
Yeah, it doesn't really bode well. I was looking at the fact United had. Well, for people who've been following football stats for a long time, you might remember that there was a time when we didn't talk about, where people didn't talk about expected goals. They talked about, shots on target and total shots ratio and all that kind of stuff. And I'm actually not really going to talk about that. I don't know why I said that. But United had 10 shots on target in this game. Yeah. And they only managed that twice last season. And they were in 2 home games against Sheffield United and Burnley. And here they did it on the road against Southampton. And I do not think this is a very good sign for Southampton. This is a United team which is certainly not up to speed, whatever that might eventually be, like I guess like 20 miles an hour. You're already
it's like a Manchester tram.
Yeah, exactly. You're already kind of like maybe pegging Russell Martin as somebody who could be out the door.
So I'm going to give myself two things that we will typically not do on, and I'm already violating this, that we will typically not do on the transfer flow is we won't pick on referees very often. Like that's a very hard job. The media loves it. I think that it's really unfair.
Didn't agree to that.
These people are very publicly doing an incredibly difficult job, and we're mean to them. Occasionally you can pick on the VAR people because that seems like, you should be better than that. But the other thing that I don't like to do necessarily is be like, oh yeah, this head coach should clearly be fired, because you don't really know what's going on behind the scenes. But after 4 games against not that difficult of a schedule, where Southampton basically seemed clueless across 2 halves of any particular football game, you're like, they spent a lot of money. This guy isn't it. Like sometimes you need to fire fast. And I don't think that Southampton really kind of fully expected to come up last year. They came up out of the playoffs. Leeds kind of probably expected to be the team to do that and were ready to do it. So they lucked into it. But because they lucked into it, maybe they kept Russell Martin around. And then they were like, oh, well, we got to ride this through because like it'd be a weird PR problem in the summer if we got rid of him because the fans are really excited that he got us a promotion. But after 4 games, when you've seen like just no signs of life or a tactical clue, like you probably need to make that change fairly quickly because there's only 34 more left where you can get 2 to 3 points in as an average to jump out of that spot. So that's what they got to go for. I think that he's, probably first on the chopping block, at least from what I've seen.
Rough times. I think those are kind of the major stories, I think. But I gather that you wanted to take I
want to talk about the Goss. Like
this could be anything.
Goss. Yeah, well, this is Magpie Goss. So,
okay. I thought you were going to talk about the West London Festival of Incompetence that continues to roll into its 3rd year.
I'm not gonna. We can talk about that too if you want to. But
sure.
That wasn't the one I was going to be on. So before we get to that, though, I want to talk about the Goss on Newcastle side. So, for those who don't know, like Eddie Howe historically has really liked to have control over everything. And at Bournemouth, he was not very good at transfers. They actually were pretty early to bring in outside advice and consultancy. And in fact, it was Colin Traynor, who was one of the early people at StatsBomb, who was with them for either a year or two, trying to help them sort of statistically find better players and have a better recommendation set and whatever. And he didn't have the best success with it, but he did good work. We used to occasionally lament or just talk about like, hey, what are you seeing in the market? Like, what are you finding? Is that interesting or not? Now he's changing Gaelic football, which congratulations to Colin.
That's cool.
He's good Irishman. So Howe has not always been that willing to take other advice into his arena of stuff. And you got the feeling that when Dan Ashworth was put on long-term gardening leave, as Manchester United attempted to poach him away and eventually successfully did, Howe was pretty content to be able to do both the director of football job and the head coach job once again, because most coaches like to have full control. Even if they're not necessarily good at all parts of it, they feel like that's important for them to get the most out of their football teams, and they have a very high-pressure job, and I understand that. Newcastle hired Paul Mitchell this summer to now take over the director of football job to help on recruitment. The goals that we heard from Newcastle early on was that they wanted to be another super team. They wanted to take Newcastle and put it into the top 6 regularly and potentially even Champions League spots, much like Manchester City. And Manchester City used to be a yo-yo team. For those who haven't been paying attention, 16 years ago or whatever, like they were a team that may or may not end up in the bottom 4 teams every on a regular basis. So Newcastle has some of that history, but St. James's Park is a great place to play matches, great sort of supporter culture as well. And their goal was to get them up to the Champions League. Mitchell was brought in. He's like, ooh, this looks hard. And then you heard, like when we were criticizing some of the potential moves over the summertime about Mark Gahey, et cetera, you heard these weird stories behind it. They had huge PSR problems where they sold 2 very good young attackers, one of whom we think sort of was a crown jewel in Yakuba Minte, down to Brighton. Again, not the best place to sell it if you're looking for a counterexample of, he wasn't that good, we'll be fine. And you kind of felt like there was going to be a reckoning around all of this at the end of it. So we've seen the last 2 weeks in the press where, Mitchell's been sort of walking back some stuff and saying, hey, we have to have a long-term plan. I'm here to get the team to the original goals in 5 years. It would be amazing if everybody had a 5-year timeline of football. Like, how awesome would that be? Like, usually you get 15 months and then you're gone. So he's saying that, and he's like, some of the choices weren't the best and we couldn't get some of the things done. But then you knew that there was going to be some counterpoint out there, and friends in the media talking about criticisms of Mitchell's plan and how he might not actually be suitable for the job. And really, that's probably Eddie Howe taking offense at some of the open criticism of things that he was in charge of during that period of time. So anyway, it's a very everybody's walking on eggshells up there, and they apparently are not talking much. And I'm just like, that's pretty unusual. And something's going to happen. And it might have been better for everyone involved if Howe had taken the England job when, apparently he was one of the front runners for it. Now it looks like people are sort of solidifying around Lee Carsley, which is not a best way to run a job search, I think. But I also don't dislike Lee Carsley. I think he's probably a pretty good tournament manager, things like that. I just found it interesting. And we like the gossip around here. It's fun to talk about these things. It's fun to kind of pick about certain bets that ring true or not. Newcastle have 10 points from 4 games. They don't look very good, but they got 10 points, and that's a lot better than it could be.
Yeah, looking about as good as Wolves in a game against them is not something that I think is a great sign for future success. I don't know how are they going to resolve this? Like, how do you resolve this situation? Like, do the club owners sit you down and say these two roles historically have intersected quite a bit?
You might need to
a lot. Like work together.
You don't is the short answer. If they actually immediately start hating each other and can't get past that, then somebody has to go, and it ends up being the club ownership's prerogative and almost decree that they need to pick a path, and they need to who they're going to stick behind. And in some cases, it's how much money do we have to pay that guy in order to leave?
Yeah, I can imagine.
But what they don't do, and what they clearly did not want to do, because they made the choice already in the summertime, is they don't just want Eddie Howe to oversee stuff. Because if they did, they would have left it that way, and they would have brought in someone handpicked by him for a ceremonial role, much like Klopp was able to do over Liverpool. But I don't think that that's the case. And so they view it as, in order for us to continue to progress, we're going to need to do X, Y, Z. And that needs to be somebody that has a long-term vision for the club, and not somebody that is, the day-to-day having to deal with all the nonsense, both in the first team and elsewhere.
But that's the end of our inaugural gossip segment.
Yeah.
Well, we need a name for it.
Well, we have some South Coast nonsense that we should talk about. There was a match down there.
Well, yeah. I mean, like, there was half a match down there. Chelsea, still looking great. Still just looking excellent. Still keep doing what you're doing. Great stuff against Bournemouth.
Can you please elaborate on that take? I want to hear more.
I love watching Chelsea Football Club. I love it. I think they play football the right way. I think they do behind the scenes stuff the right way.
Are you sure you don't mean a different blue team that plays down on the South Coast?
Look, Ted.
Regularly?
I don't see what your opposition to giving me a contract until 2033 would realistically be. I think they've revolutionized the industry. But yeah, Chelsea.
So that was last week. You missed that last week. Ravi and I talked all about that last week. But we want to talk about the match. So the match against Bournemouth, for those who didn't follow the betting stuff this weekend, and it's actually free on the YouTube. I'll be posting the Premier League picks free, probably on sort of 6, 8, 12-hour delay, but you'll be able to see them there. And you'll be able to reference back and make fun of me as things go poorly. The expected goals numbers for this one were pretty terrible for Chelsea. And Bournemouth looked like, even without the penalty, they were in control of most of this match. The problem being that there was, first of all, like the first half, like Pedro Neto was subbed off for Jadon Sancho. Neto didn't do much. Sancho looked quite frisky. And so that's a good sign for Chelsea. But the bigger issue is just like Bournemouth were really good, and Chelsea didn't seem to have many ideas until finally Sancho opened them up very late on, 86th minute. A goal for Nkuku, who also it's nice to see him come back. There are players that we like that play for these different teams. You can't necessarily complain about the players. But there was a missed penalty in there by Evan Nielsen that should have put Bournemouth up 1-0. And we had the numbers, or StatsBomb had the numbers, as only 14% of the time did Chelsea come out of that with 3 points. Now, over the course of the season, you'll have a few 14%ers happen over the course of 50, 60 matches, especially across different cup competitions. Oh, Chelsea aren't in a lot of different cup competitions either. Sorry. But it's not a good sign for your long-term success, in that, like, this is a thing that has to happen. And so even with the talent, and we think Chelsea's first team are pretty good, it either means that Bournemouth are really good, which I like them, but I don't think they're really good. Or it means that Chelsea are going to start like running into some road grader problems, where, much like the Crystal Palace game, where I thought they were actually better, but they were at home. Yeah, they're going to struggle to get some results, and they may hit some long stretches in kind of the winter or into the spring that, you can't perform like this and get 3 points all the time. It doesn't work.
No. And there's only so much that your players, just like doing shit, can bail you out. There needs to also be a structure that helps them do that.
Yeah, I mean, it used to be the Jose Mourinho thing where you have a great defensive structure and then players just please go do shit.
Yeah.
If you have elite talent, and especially if you have giants that like wear the other team down the entire time, like that is a recipe for success. But you can't do that in the Premier League anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Like every once in a while, somebody will come up with like an awesome goal, but you don't see the type of individual goals that we used to, where a guy beats like multiple guys. Like think of an old Fernando Torres goal, where like he's just done insane things, and he beat one or two guys like on the fly. Thierry Henry as well. Like you do not see guys get 1v1 like Henry used to do seemingly like every match. Like he'd be 1v1 with a dude out wide and then suddenly it's a goal. Like it doesn't happen anymore. Teams are much better defensively structured than they used to be. And so, yeah, it's not a recipe for success. The coaching level is much higher here. I feel like either Maresca is going to struggle long-term here, or they're not executing his plan. Last year, we knew that Pochettino had a plan. By the end of the year, they were performing like a top 4 team. They just needed to kind of continue on with that, and they probably would have been this year. It looked like it anyway. They didn't choose to stick with Pochettino. Who actually chose to get rid of him was something that was also interesting in the press while you were on holiday, and which ownership group. But yeah, it's something to keep an eye on, because like either Chelsea need to start executing a better tactical plan, or there is no tactical plan and they're just going to be vibes all year. And that's going to be kind of a 6th to 10th finish.
Yeah. Look, I just think they should do vibes.
Vibes.
Yeah, vibes all the way.
Arsenal are going to be miserable to watch for about 3 months, but if they get results, like it's better than vibes.
Look, I think that if you like Arteta, then you've got to get on board with the Moisismo as well as the Pepismo. You know,
is he signed through 2033 as well?
If only. Okay, I think there's the only other thing I wanted to say before I'm done with my part of it is West Ham. Yuck.
No. It's not good.
It's not good. 21 shots, nearly 3 XG to Fulham. Like, I like Fulham. They're full of ex-Arsenal boys. But they're like a nice club as opposed to, you know, an attacking whirlwind. And West Ham were getting crushed in this game.
Yeah, I was on the fence coming into it. I wasn't sure what to think about Fulham. I had a negative lean on West Ham, and I wanted to see how it played out. Now, the result tells you that it's 1-1. So what do we know? Danny Ings is completely rejuvenated and scoring goals. So, like, you know, who wouldn't? Yeah, we'll see. They spent a lot of money. I'm trying to keep the bit going. You're just stonewalling me over here. Come on.
Just can't finish the sentence. Ings, Fulkrug, it's all happening. Yeah. Well, great times at West Ham. Can't possibly go wrong. I don't know. Is there anything else that you want to pick? It was an interesting weekend of football. It was very interesting to watch in the light of having watched your betting preview, because there were places like the like the Spurs game, where I was kind of like, okay, process, right, but Ted loses money. Fortunately, I did that, so it's fine.
We're not trying to plug this super hard. That's not kind of the intent. It does give you the light through which that we view it, and it also gives you the light through which like a lot of teams, especially with ownership groups like a Brighton or a Brentford, kind of have brought to looking at squad composition, or how do we break down these teams, or what are we seeing in the numbers that suggests good or bad things either way. And we'll continue on with it. We won't necessarily talk about it that often in the newsletter. It'll go to just the premium subscribers. But I have found that like I'm back in it, and I was like, oh wow, this is fun. It feels like a muscle that I haven't exercised in a long time. The losing is shitty, but hopefully that's a thing that turns itself around. And you could see again from the process stuff, like Chelsea were only 14% to win that one. Spurs 72% of the time like win that bet as well. And you're like, all right, well, it feels like we kind of had the analysis correct, even if the results weren't that way. So yeah, it's a fun week to week thing. The one that I got skunked on was the Brighton one. I thought Brighton would break down Ipswich, and Ipswich like were just good enough to do a lot of last chance tackling and keep the ball out of like a bunch of shots in the first half. Second half, I think everybody tired a bit, but yeah, I think Ipswich games are still going to be track meets, and I think other teams are going to put up 4s and 5s against them.
Oh, thank you very much for I guess, welcoming me back into the fold, Ted. It's been nice soft landing Premier League round.
It's wonderful to see you back. It's good to have games to talk about, and it's a Champions League week, so get ready for the theme music.
Oh, I am actually pumped for the Champions League, which will run
tingly,
forever,
little tingly,
forever.
not only are you stoked about the Champions League, but you're also stoked about not having to play in Europa League, or the conference.
Honestly, it's the best thing in the world. Those few years of my life were so painful that I just don't want to, especially while working in like football media. I couldn't just retreat into my world of people who hate football and never talk to me about it.
I just pretend that there's no matches on midweek during that period of time until we get to the knockout rounds of the Champions League, which I'll watch those. But now I'm forced to once again watch on like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. When do these even happen anymore? Who knows?
They're just constant. They're constant until we die. Okay. Thank you very much for chatting, and thank you to you guys for listening, watching. Please do subscribe to the channel on YouTube. Drop us any questions that you want us to answer in the comments below, or you can always reply to the Transfer Flow on Twitter, or to me, I guess. Leave Ted alone. He's got more important things to think about. Make sure that you leave us a 5-star review if you'd like to, if you think it's worthy of 5 stars, 6 stars if you want. And we'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.